Hello there. Welcome to Let's Talk Research. I'm Dr. Charity Marsh, the director of the Humanities Research Institute, or the HRI, at the University of Regina. Let's Talk Research is produced in Treaty 4 lands, and the University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. Let's Talk Research is a podcast focusing on the diverse, innovative, and critical research that is supported by the HRI. Today's conversation is part 2 of our podcast, focusing on film heritage, collaborative curatorship, and bringing Africa to the world via cinema and festivals outside the African continent. To listen to part 1, you can head to the HRI website, humanitiesresearch.org, or to any of your favorite podcast platforms. With us today to help host this conversation is Dr. Sheila Petty, a professor of media studies and Sask Power Research Chair in Cultural Heritage at the University of Regina. Around the globe, film festivals offer platforms for understanding film cultures and their contexts of production, distribution, and reception. In today's episode, we're going to carry on a conversation with experts from 3 different continents who understand film festivals as spaces of living cultural heritage involving multiple audiences that engage with local and transnational levels of meaning. Dr. Ben Akoh is founder and president of the African Movie Festival in Manitoba. Dr. Camila Esteves is the founder and curator of the Mostra de Cinemas Africanos in Sao Paulo and Salvador, Brazil. And finally, Dr. Estrella Sendra is currently working as a lecturer at the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom. She was the director of the Cambridge African Film Festival in 2014 and 2015, and in 2020, she was the curator of the African Film Festival of Barcelona. Throughout this conversation, you're going to hear a brief clip from the following film: the 1983 film Camera d'Afrique, directed by Farid Bougadir. And now, part 2 of the podcast.
When I think of collaboration, I often think about it from the perspective of the different sort of clusters of, organizations, people, structures that we can be a part of. I would think about collaboration, for instance, amongst African institutions and organizations. And there are a bunch of them in Manitoba, where I live. There are a bunch of them across Canada. And there are quite a number of them across the world as well that there could be connections with. I find this as quite significant because that's where you find your grounding from. When you're able to get in touch with your African communities or African organizations within the country or the location that you are, there is grounding there. There is grounding in terms of, how you curate the kind of films that you put out, the story that you want to tell, how those stories connect with your community that you currently live in. And I think it's important because you brought that point up, Camila, that curatorship is a place of power. It is power. You tell the message. You don't own the camera at this point. You're not the one determining what gets screened on the film, but you determine what gets shown in the cinema, in the festival. It's a very powerful place. And what actually grounds you is the sort of community that you have around you. They help you to understand that this might be a good story according to you, but in terms of the general context, its message may not be relevant, may not be correct at this point, and you should probably think about changing it or, putting a different message out. Now, that scenario has its positives and negatives. Positive in the sense that you tend to lose your power when you share and collaborate with others in a way. But on the flip side of it, you don't have that in what we will call in media circle, the editorial responsibility of determining what gets shown on the screen. Of course, you can override everybody's suggestions and comments, but really at the end of the day, you're building a community, you're building a group, and you need to have people support you. And so listening to them is quite key. I think that's important. And this comment really does not say you don't do that, Anna, Camila, or Estrella. It's just that I think for us as curators, it's important that we liaise with our communities and the structures that are around us. Secondly, I find collaboration as really important with our allies. In Canada, I live a lot with Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. And it's amazing how similar our stories are, whether it's the story of colonization or it's the story of our political history in terms of how cultures were carted away and traditions were destroyed because of the influence of colonialism. Those allies that we seem to find similar stories with tend to support us in the message that we portray. And I think that recognizing their structures and in some cases differences that they present in our context is useful in terms of how we push the message forward, not just to them, but to everyone within the community that we live in. Finally, I think about collaboration from yourselves, film enthusiasts, curators, colleagues in the film industry or cinema industry, that we tend to share information with. We share our ideas of curatorship, what the next festival will look like so that we get inputs and comments from everyone else. That's significant. That's really important. I like that we are able to do that. And I do like what Estrella is doing in the UK, where you have TANO and all of those structures to help you co-curate and even go back and preserve heritage for several years. That's phenomenal. I think that's a lesson that we can look forward to here. But that brings the point too that you made, Anna Camila, in terms of what will the future look like, right? What are some of the lessons that we can take from our conversations here in terms of going forward? How can we begin to think about collaboration in a way that strengthens our individual festivals? How can we think about collaboration in a way that gets us to actually preserve cultural heritage, not just the media in which those heritage is displayed? How can we think about collaboration and a perspective of sharing resources similar to what's going on in the UK? I think the context of what we have, especially here in Canada, where the discussion between or the tension between Black films and African films still exists as well, is perhaps not doing us good. It could potentially do us better if we actually look at the differences and help ourselves to recognize what our unique contexts are and how we can support each other as opposed to a competitive framework that we currently assume. So collaboration is key, but we have to think about how to do it better.
I just want to add something in relation to what has been said about the curator being in a place of power. I think that our focus today on collaboration is showing us that it can also be a place of counterpower at the end of the day, and how we can achieve that through collaborative practices and careful practices. I think that in this time of pandemic, there's been so much reflection on what needs to change in film festivals internationally. And actually, I'm teaching about these issues right now, and it's very stimulating to try and challenge, class members and colleagues and students working on these issues or thinking about these issues, about ideas of size, right? Because at the end of the day, small film festivals were the ones that were really able to think about effective formulas with the community to remain alive in times of COVID, with social distance editions and so on. I remember witnessing what Senegal was doing, and it was great. But I also remember what film festivals were talking about and thinking about how they could develop audiences. And I was like, well, a lot of what you are mentioning as solutions, I've seen that already for the past 10 years in the context of Senegal and festivals. And it's this kind of like audience-centered curatorial approach that there is over there. And when I say over there, I mean, in this case, in Senegal, where I've conducted so much of my research, and where there is an increasing amount of film festivals that are decentralizing their spaces and that are establishing themselves and creating a sort of circuit, a parallel network at least. So I think that there is something interesting to think about in relation to how collaboration may be also a formula to share caring practices, but also to to think about sustainable forms of management, because we are all aware of how difficult it is for us to remain alive. And I use these words because they are making me think of the work as well, heritage, and what kind of places there are in order to celebrate all of this and to make sure that there are the resources for these spaces to be able to run year after year.
I was going to comment on that as well, Estrella, because I was not thinking about collaboration as all of this that Ben was mentioning. And I thank him for that, because now I am thinking about it. I think everything that happens with our festival here is related in all these different layers. Because, our first edition was in 2018. And since then, we had 11 editions. We have more than one edition a year. So it happened because we had all these institutions and all these different audiences really interested in what we were doing. I keep saying that it was different because we were focusing on contemporary African films only, and people were so curious about it. So it was not, and I know it doesn't really sound good, but after a while, we were not having all these difficulties to keep going, because loads of different groups and institutions were very interested in what we were doing. And I think it has to do with context as well. And I think it's not only here. I think there is this thing about African culture, African art all around the world. And I think being here in Brazil and doing that and highlighting only Africa and contemporary Africa, I think it helped us work. And the other thing about collaboration that I was mentioning before is that we actually are building an audience, and the pandemic really helped us with that, because we were focused in São Paulo. But then with the pandemic, we had all these, national audiences. And I was, paying attention to the fact that they started to expect the same approaches as a Black film and all that. But then with the other things that we were doing, we are publishing articles and books and all that, and all the catalog and all those things we were discussing. We were offering classes and roundtables and all of that. People started to understand that we were talking about cinema. And with that, I just want to, highlight the fact that we are not another Black film festival in Brazil, because there are so many. And I actually collaborate with loads of them, because it's not that I am denying this relation between these two things. It's just that I'm doing another thing. And it has to do with, Estrella just mentioned, that we need to survive. And after all, we are talking about, at least for me, I am a cultural producer. And I am doing all those things together related to African cinema research and my work as a producer, as a curator. So I have to manage all this context to being able to work. And it's another thing that I would like to address, but I'm not sure it's pertinent right now. But is the fact that, the institutions, they are supporting us with African cinema here in Brazil. All these, the French Embassy, the Goethe Institute, all these people, the European people, and the programs, they are, focused on African art in general. And also my main sponsor, it's an institution called SESC, and they have these huge program around social service, and they offer different services for the population and all. And they are really interested in being linked to the African universe, if I can, say that. So, well, my point is, this country, in the context of this country, I think there's a lot of, tricks and things that we need to address and think better, because I don't think there's a war or anything between the Black film and the African film. I just think that not only in cinema, but in other areas, people are, making all this thing as one. And it's being hard for us to deal with that as researchers and curators and all that. And that's why I was talking about the curatorship as the place of power. Because, I agree with everything that Estrella said. It's just the fact that we are talking about the curatorship outside Africa and how we are picking these films and how we are picking films, thinking about the audiences, thinking about those people that are coming to watch these films because they know your festival, they know what you're doing, they know your work. So what is exactly this that we are making out of our work?
Anna, Camila, that's quite an important part that you just talked about there. One of the challenges that we as a film festival, the African Movie Festival in Manitoba, has been facing lately is to begin to think about the quality of the films that we produce. And when we talk about quality, we're thinking about quality from two perspectives. One, the quality of the medium that is being produced in terms of the style, the graphics, the presentation, and all of that. But we're also thinking about quality from the quality of the story that is being told. It would appear from a number of films that we've seen in the past, especially films that are portrayed as African films, tend to show some gore and some stories that really are somewhat not depicting of the culture, the typical African culture that I know of and that I'm familiar with, but really becomes a message that is being perpetrated by the film sponsor or the producer of the film. And so there is a context there that we need to talk about at some point, where the funder of the film tends to push the message of the film further rather than the creative abilities or the actual story that needs to be told by the film creators themselves. And so that has some implications. That has implications in terms of film distributions, the films that we get to see in these parts of the world versus the films that are actually screened in Africa itself, right? And you could see that a lot of films that are screened in our parts of the world may have never been screened in cinemas or even in home distribution systems in Africa. And that has to do a lot with the funding structure and the models of support that has been given to those institutions. So there is a question, or there's something there for us to talk about. But I want to go back to a comment that we've made, and we talked about heritage. Farid Bougadir did this film called Camera d'Afrique, which was a 20-year review of African cinema. And Farid had gone all the way back to a number of FESPACO events. And FESPACO is one of the oldest film festivals in Africa in Ouagadougou. Gone back to those events and had interviewed a number of people. And over the years, he's just been collecting clips of these interviews and finally put them together last year. And this was a film we screened in our festival.
Moi, l'Europe n'est pas mon centre. L'Europe est une périphérie de l'Afrique. Vous voyez? Ils sont restés plus de 100 ans chez moi, ils n'ont pas parlé ma langue, je parle leur langue. L'avenir, pour moi, l'avenir ne dépend pas d'être compris par l'Europe. Je souhaiterais qu'ils me comprennent, mais ça ne me fait absolument rien. Si vous prenez la carte de l'Afrique, géographiquement, vous pouvez mettre l'Europe et l'Amérique, il nous resterait encore de la place. Pourquoi voulez-vous que ce tropisme?
It was interesting to see how the global structure of film or cinema is determined from the West as opposed to from in Africa. Africa itself has not had access to cinemas to be able to push its stories. Africa has not had a say to a large extent in terms of the message behind the films that they create and push forward. Now, that's different. It's becoming different lately, especially with the influence of Nollywood and its production capacity, that they have a lot of great stories that are emanating from the different African countries and the culture. So a lot of people are beginning to push their own message out, push their own stories out. And this is even further reaching out into the different contexts that we live in the West through our film festivals, because there is a demand from people that are Africans or connected to Africa that live in our community, right? They live in our community. And so they would like to see some of the things that they came from. And this is portrayed through some of the films that we curate and screen in our festival. But that is also, that leads me to a point around this gentleman who had lived in Africa in the past, and actually another lady that would constantly come to the festival, our festival. And every time I look at them and ask them questions, why are you here? They often refer to their time in Africa and how they connected with the culture. And for them, the festival was an opening for them to reestablish connects with, the history, that part of themselves that they had living in Africa. And I think that's an important part, of the conversations that we're having. I would make a final comment around the impact of COVID-19 or the pandemic on the festival. Anna, Camila, and Estrella, you'd mentioned a couple of very important points there. I think what for us emerged is that it forced us as a festival to think about new distribution models, right? How can we get audiences and other people to be a part of our festival? How can we get others that would not traditionally walk through the doors to be able to access our festival? So there were digital distribution models that we had begun to experience. And of course, we were beginning to see increased number of participation. There is a good point here. The point is that we're able to curate better. We're able to reach wider audiences. Intrinsically, we're able to push our messages to a broader sort of people within our communities. And I think that's really important for us to recognize and to find ways of improving on the good that the pandemic provided us, which is to find alternative distribution models. For me, I felt I planned the festival twice every year and presented it once, because every time I had an opportunity of presenting the festival, there was a shutdown. And what happened was we were able to refine our previous plan and go back, to the drawing boards and then present something that was much better than what we had anticipated at the beginning. So there were benefits of the pandemic to us. How can we take that forward? Perhaps there are some lessons learned in this process. I'll leave it at that for now.
I think that's a really great overview of what you have been doing with your festivals, how you've been collaborating, what you've been doing during the pandemic and COVID-19. Perhaps we could focus specifically on the role of heritage in the future, the role of archiving, safeguarding, maintaining film heritage, and the role of the curator in the future, and the curator as activist. Do you, the three of you, consider yourselves film activists?
I think so. I mean, in the way in which we are already seeing that we are addressing a gap, a narrative of exclusion, that is already showing that we are actively trying to change that. And to me, that involves an activist dimension. We are also acknowledging a lack of equality in the kinds of heritage that are accessible widely, and the role of the curator in carefully thinking, because we are carefully using this term. We are not saying, we are programmers. No, we are saying we are curators. We are preserving, we are putting the past and present in conversation. A film like Caméra d'Afrique that Ben was just mentioning is a nice one to have in conversation with past and contemporary titles. And I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed the most about the Africa Emotion Online Film Festival in times of COVID was I think it was a program that had been co-curated by Camila Esteves or one of her colleagues that was about Afrofuturism in Brazil. And again, one in which we can see that there are ways of imagining the future that are very much entrenched in heritage and past stories and ways of living that one would not associate with the future. And all of a sudden, there is a whole idea of being subversive about what are the sources that will contribute to the building of the future. So in that sense, I do see an activist dimension. And also in the way in which whenever we are providing context, and we started by speaking about this, I can't remember if it was Ben or Anna Camila who started to address the importance of context in film festivals. The moment in which we are putting together a context and we are also trying to offer a festive context of understanding and receiving and interpreting these films, that is also very much being an activist that is trying to move from that careful and intimate relation with films that we consider as worth watching with audiences who are out there, and that we want to involve in the cause of preserving and thinking of this heritage and decolonizing this heritage and continuously contesting what heritage means across different contexts.
Thank you, Estrella. I think I agree with everything that you just said. I just wanted to maybe address this thing about the future, because it has to do with Ben was just saying about the new forms of distribution that we actually knew about during the pandemic. And actually, Estrella and I, we started to write an article about that, about this experience of curating for, online film festivals, and how the audiences are going to relate to the films, watching it in computers and phones and all that. But I think the issue of distribution, when we are talking about African film, is not really, I think it's not really impacted by the pandemic as we would like to, and I say that because I have been suffering with that, because the online environment, it was supposed to be more, accessible and all that, but not all, but loads of the agencies that hold the rights for African films, and, films in general, they were very strict, and they were trying to make us a weird relation between the number of views with the number of tickets in a room. So it was really weird for me to deal with that. So I think this thing about the distribution, including the fact that African filmmakers, they don't really make money out of their films when they are, inside this logic of the European agencies. So, to me, my experience, I made maybe 4 online editions during the pandemic. It was really hard. I think it was not anything easier as I was expecting. So the only thing that I can testify is the fact that we grew the audiences like, oh my God, so much. We have like so much people now knowing what we are doing and all that. So yeah, we are trying to make this work of, because it's different if I am a curator curating for São Paulo, and if I am a curator curating for the whole country. And it affected me because I started to think about the audiences and how I was going to approach different audiences and different expectations. It was kind of overwhelming sometimes, but I think the biggest lesson that I took from it is the fact that now I am producing material about all those films, all the online environments that allowed me to make different collaborations in terms of publications and curatorship, shared curatorship. And now I think, because every time I think about the future, I think about all the films that we were able to screen, that we were able to subtitle in Portuguese, which is very important because it's so expensive, and we have been, investing in it to make it, accessible and all of that. So we have been doing so many things, and right now we are going to release a website, like an online magazine for film critics and, film reviews and interviews and all this content on African film in Brazil, in Portuguese, with several collaborators in the country. So we are always trying to make a memory out of what we are doing, because we are doing so many things.
I just wanted to add something, because I think that Camila is super modest with the amazing work that she does. And if we are talking about that preservation of an archival of what we do at festivals, you've been doing an exceptional work and very remarkable. It's not very present in other film festivals. And it's this production of catalogs where you extend the conversation around the films that are curated for the program. And this is also very innovative in that you are connecting research and practice. You are understanding that, these things have to be archived somewhere, and our reflections about these films. So there is a parallelism between what goes on in the actual festival and what gets written in this catalog that will remain forever, and where some of the things, there is like a continuous multi-directional dialogue between these two different spaces, the written one and the live one in your festival. So I really wanted to highlight that, and maybe for you to also share more of that later after Ben's contribution. Thank you and congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Anna Camila. That was awesome. And Estrella as well for recognizing that. In terms of the future, and I think we've hit on some very important points there when we talk about future, especially activism in the future as well. One of the things that we have seen here in my city, in Winnipeg, is that film production is often not within the domain or the context of Africans or people who identify as Black in the community. There are not as many Black filmmakers and producers as there are people from other ethnic backgrounds. And how we are trying to address that through the African Movie Festival is to create what we call a film masterclass, which allows us to recruit really young filmmakers or potential filmmakers or people interested in filmmaking into the class and to hand them a computer as well as a quick lesson on how to create films, from creating their story all the way to post-production. And through that, we've been able to equip young potential filmmakers. A few of them right now have been in major productions since we have started this program, and a few of them are going on to become interns in large production companies. So there is some benefit and value in this preservation culture. And I talk about that preservation culture in relation to activism. A way for us to be able to preserve is to be activists, is to preserve. And we preserve by skilling and empowering young people to begin to take on the responsibilities that our festivals would have in the future. And I think for us, it would be a great idea to begin to think about what that future would look like and how we can begin to build capacity for people to take those responsibilities. It could come in the form of the volunteers that you have and the structures of volunteerism that you create within your festival. We're learning those lessons that our volunteers are quite key and important to us. And for us to be able to share our experience and our knowledge with them, to empower them in order that they can help the film festival, is helping us preserve and to become activists at the same time. Finally, when we curate, we are activists. When we curate, we preserve culture. When we do those, we are speaking to the preservation of a culture that potentially could tend to death or extinction. And by being in the forefront of curatorship, we're fighting against that, and we're promoting the life, and extending the life of films or cinema or culture that could potentially become extinct. And I think in that respect, we're doing a great job, and we are activists and will continue to be activists in order to make this, our cultures become a lot more evident in the context that we live in. One last comment that I'd like to put forward as we conclude is, I think it's important for us to think about the African culture in the context of the West and how we can preserve that. And cinema helps us to do that. But it shouldn't just be cinema left to open interpretation. It should be cinema left to interpretation that is supported by a strong and a rich African context. As much as we can do that through the communities and through the collaborations that we can put forward and support that message within our communities, I think the better for it. We play a significant role as activists. It could be a thankless job at times, but often the rewards are in the future in terms of what we do and how we, make sure that our children and their children are able to live in a cultural, societal context that recognizes them, their differences, their culture, and how their culture contributes to this, in our Canadian context, the cultural mosaic we call Canada.
We are thinking of ourselves, as you were very well saying, Ben, as activists, in that at the end of the day, by preserving, bringing, celebrating various film heritage, we are trying to contribute to decolonizing the gaze, something that has implications beyond the film culture. Decolonizing the gaze has implications as well in our society, in the way in which we are imagining this world and the various hierarchies that there are. Now, I would just encourage ourselves to extend this collaboration and this dialogue and to try and think of what it's being done as well in the African continent, not as separate from what it's being done here, but to rather try and integrate those curatorial practices that we have so much to learn from. And thank you so much for inviting me to be so well surrounded today we don't exchange as much as we would love to. So thank you so much, Sheila, for putting us together in this virtual room. And I really hope that it won't be virtual one day and that we will all get to meet and curate a festival together and get festive afterwards. And thank you so much as well for all the technical help to Charity Marsh. I've really enjoyed being part of this. Thank you.
The other day I was talking to Sheila about it, how this curatorship process of myself here, it's been so lonely. And sometimes I am, watching loads and loads and loads of films. And I don't want to, to make decisions about these films by myself. Of course, I have Beatrice to exchange, but I think we need this idea of collaboration in the process of curatorship. And I remember maybe last year or 2 years ago, I don't remember well, in Ben's Festival, when we had the opportunity to watch the films that he received, coming from submissions. And it was good, it felt good to share this experience, to watch the same films and to have, comments on that. And I really think it's something that we need to do in order to continue to address all these things that we are talking about, because we have different contexts, we have different challenges, but we have all these, the will that we have to bring all these cinematographies to the world, to our world specifically, is so strong. And I think that's what's bringing us together here and with everything that we were doing. So I truly hope that we can, actually do this. I am very open. I would love to receive you here in our festival this year and, all the other years. But I'm really open to collaborate, like in real life, in virtual life, in whatever we can do. So it was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, the three of you, for bringing Africa to the world today during this podcast. Ana, Camila, Esteves, Ben, Akoh, Estrella, Sendra, Fernandez, thank you so much. Thank you, Charity Marsh and the Humanities Research Institute at the University of Regina.
Let's Talk Research is produced by me, Dr. Charity Marsh, and I'm supported in this project by my tech-savvy and creative research assistant, Maria Azam, and the fantastic folks at Roman Empire Studios. You can find Let's Talk Research on the HRI website or on your favorite podcasting platform. Thanks for listening.